If you agree that real respect isn't measured by a uniform or a stripe on your sleeve, but by the weight of what someone has carried in silence, make sure to like and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear will remind you why the quiet ones often hold the loudest truths. It didn't begin with parades, or rifles in the air, or the sound of a bugle echoing across parade grounds. No, it began with steam. Steam rising from aluminum trays lined across a counter in a mess hall. It began with the metallic clatter of serving spoons, trays sliding forward in restless hands, and voices, always voices, buzzing with bravado and complaint. And it began with her. 28 years old, hair tied back beneath a plain cap, apron snug around her waist, gloves tugged tight at the wrist. She stood behind the counter every day at the same time, serving ladle after ladle as though she had nothing else in the world to do. Most cadets never learned her name. They didn't bother. To them, she was invisible, background noise, the one who filled their trays before they went off to more important things. "Hey, lunch lady." One cadet laughed, sliding his tray too hard against the counter, splattering stew down his sleeve. "Don't forget the extra. I'll need the strength since you probably couldn't last 5 minutes in the field." Laughter rippled down the line, sharp and careless. She didn't answer. She didn't even look up. She set the ladle back, reset her stance, calm, precise, unmoved. Day after day, it was the same. Cadets joked, smirked, sometimes nudged one another just to see if they could make her react. But she never did. Her silence only made them louder, more certain that they were right. They thought she had no stories worth telling, no past worth knowing. They thought the only weight she carried was the pot she stirred. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have guessed, was that her silence wasn't weakness. It was armor. And behind that armor was a truth none of them were ready to face. She had a name, but not one she spoke here. Not one she wore on a tag pinned to her apron. Her name lived on encrypted channels, in classified files buried deep where no cadet could dig. A name whispered in urgent transmissions and recorded in reports still stamped, redacted. Comet Shade. But in the mess hall she was just the girl behind the counter. That was the camouflage. The hall itself was a theater of noise and heat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Boots slammed against linoleum floors. Metal chairs scraped endlessly across the ground. The air smelled of powdered coffee, stale bread, reheated meats, and sweat. Every corner echoed with the impatience of youth, cadets filling their plates with food they didn't appreciate while throwing around words they barely understood. Courage, loyalty, sacrifice. She moved through it like a shadow, always present, never noticed. Even the other kitchen staff said little about her. They knew she came early, left late, never complained, never gossiped. She worked with the same measured rhythm every day: ladle, scoop, tray. Step back, reset. Ladle, scoop, tray. But if anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed that her movements weren't like the others. There was no wasted motion, no slouch, no careless shift of weight. Her posture stayed squared. Her gaze stayed steady. Even when her hands worked, her eyes scanned doors, windows, the line of cadets, the radio mounted high on the wall. Always the radio. That was what unsettled one or two cadets who were observant enough to notice. The way her eyes lingered on it, not with boredom but with intent, as though she were waiting for it to speak. One whispered to another, "She moves like she's military." The friend laughed. "Please. She's a cook. Probably failed out." The joke spread, easy as oxygen to a fire. They laughed harder after that, convinced they had her figured out. But they didn't. She was younger than the veterans who sometimes visited, but older than the cadets who filed past her counter. Her age placed her in an in-between no one bothered to question. Too old to be considered a peer. Too young to be mistaken for a relic. So they assigned her no story. They gave her no place. That made the camouflage perfect. They saw an apron, a ladle, a tired worker. What they didn't see was the history sealed behind that silence. She had served where their textbooks ended in ellipses. She had walked landscapes whose names never made it to the news. She had carried intel, not trays. Signals, not spoons. Her call sign had been whispered in rooms where maps sprawled under red light, where entire units depended on one decision. She had watched operations unfold from shadows and survived them when others didn't. But she never spoke of it. Not here. Not now. Not while it still mattered that her face blended in, that her story remained untold. And so the cadets went on mocking, not realizing that every barb they threw only deepened the contrast for what was coming. They saw her hands scoop rice, but didn't see how steady those hands stayed. They heard her silence and mistook it for passivity, never recognizing that silence has its own kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that waits. Every morning before the first cadet arrived, she walked the hall, not to check the ovens or the stockroom, but to trace exits, latches, blind spots. She tested the door hinges, counted the cameras, memorized the placement of tables and chairs. To others it looked like habit. To her it was survival. That instinct doesn't die when the mission ends. It clings, sharp and insistent, whispering that even safe places can turn in a moment. She listened. They didn't know it, but she was cataloging them too. The cadets who laughed the loudest, the ones who watched her a beat too long, the ones who mouthed off to officers, the ones who studied their manuals late into the night. She learned their patterns the way she once learned enemy transmissions, piecing together truths from fragments. If they had noticed her notebook, small, tucked in the pocket of her apron, they might have realized it wasn't for recipes. But they never noticed. The mess hall became her post, the apron her disguise, the ladle her weapon of misdirection. And the cadets, in their arrogance, became her cover. They saw what they wanted to see. A cook, an extra, someone small. But the silence was building. Every scrape of a tray, every careless joke, every dismissive laugh was only setting the stage higher for the moment the static on the radio would crack and the voice would call a name they didn't recognize. Comet Shade. And when it did, when the disguise fell away in a single moment, the laughter would die, the trays would still, and the mess hall would never again be just a place for food. Until then, she waited. Scooping, serving, silent. But silence doesn't last forever. And the day was coming when every cadet in that hall would learn who she really was. The mess hall had always been a theater for arrogance. Cadets swaggered in after drills with sweat still drying on their collars, voices carrying across the room like they owned it. They competed over everything. Push-up counts, mile times, target scores, who could shovel down food the fastest. But nothing fueled their laughter more than the quiet woman behind the counter, apron tied neatly, ladle in hand. She wasn't one of them, they said. Not a soldier. Not cut from the same cloth. Just staff, filling space between officers and recruits. The sort of person you forgot as soon as you left the room. And because she never answered back, because her silence gave them no resistance, their confidence grew bolder. Careful, one cadet joked, nudging his tray forward. Don't let her spill. Last week my potatoes were swimming. Another chimed in. Bet she learned that ladle grip in a 5-star kitchen. Michelin star chow time. The line erupted, shoulders shaking with laughter. She placed the scoop exactly where it belonged, slid the tray forward, and reset her stance without a word. But silence has a way of unsettling the observant, and one cadet, Peters, small for his age but sharp-eyed, couldn't help noticing the precision in her movements. Not the way she scooped, but the way she stood. He whispered at once to his friend. Doesn't move like staff. Watch her. She's different. His friend laughed. Different? She's handing us meatloaf. You've been reading too many spy novels. And with that, the observation dissolved in laughter. The truth was that her silence wasn't emptiness. It was vigilance. Every joke, every glance, every tray slammed down was catalogued, tucked away in the steady rhythm of her thoughts. She didn't flinch because flinching would break the camouflage. She didn't argue because arguing would mean revealing she had more to say. So she listened, watched, and waited. The cadets, blinded by youth and bravado, mistook patience for passivity. They mistook restraint for weakness. They mistook the way she carried herself as accidental rather than deliberate. And they were about to learn how wrong they were. It began one Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that sagged heavy with heat and monotony. The drills had been punishing. Sweat-soaked uniforms clung to restless bodies as cadets stormed into the mess hall, hungry and loud. The noise filled every corner, bouncing off the tiled walls. She was there, as always, ladle steady, eyes calm, serving each tray with the same measured precision. The line was restless, impatience boiling over into cruelty. One cadet shoved his tray forward, smirking. Come on, faster. Haven't got all day. Another, emboldened, added. Guess speed's not her strong suit. Probably couldn't even finish the obstacle course without crying. Their laughter rolled across the counter. For the first time, Peters didn't laugh. He looked at her, at the way her jaw tightened for only a second before relaxing again. At the way her eyes flicked, not to the cadet, not to the food, but to the exits, to the radio on the wall, to the reflection in the metal tray. He saw something the others didn't: calculation. She handed back the tray, wiped the counter clean, and moved on. No reaction, no slip, just silence. But silence can be louder than words, and Peters felt the weight of it pressing into him, though he couldn't explain why. The noise built through the hall. Chairs scraped, boots stomped, laughter bounced. And then it happened. A sharp crackle tore through the din. The radio mounted on the wall above the counter sputtered to life. Static cut across the laughter, sharp and electric. Conversation stumbled, trays froze midair. Every head turned instinctively toward the sound. Then a voice. Clear, urgent, commanding. Comet Shade. Advance to ops. The hall fell silent in an instant. The words echoed through the room, foreign and confusing. Cadets looked at each other, brows furrowed. Comet Shade? Who's Comet Shade? No one moved. The static hissed for another beat before the radio clicked silent again. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then, slowly, deliberately, she set the ladle down on the counter, wiped her gloves clean, untied the apron, and folded it neatly on the surface. Every movement precise, rehearsed. And without a word, she stepped out from behind a counter. The cadets parted instinctively, trays in hand, as she walked past them. No rush, no panic, just quiet certainty. Her boots struck the floor with the rhythm of someone long accustomed to command, not servitude. And in that moment, the mess hall transformed. She was no longer invisible. Every eye followed her, wide with shock, as the reality sank in. The woman they mocked, dismissed, laughed at for weeks had just answered a call none of them understood. The name hung heavy in the air, Comet Shade, a name none of them had ever heard, but one the radio had carried like a strike of lightning, one spoken with the kind of authority that left no room for doubt. Officers burst through the doors from the far end of the hall, not with confusion, not with questions, but with urgency. One of them snapped to attention the moment they saw her. "Ma'am, Ops is waiting." Another saluted sharply, stepping aside to clear her path. The cadet's jaws dropped. Saluted. To her. She gave a curt nod, nothing more, and kept walking. The officers fell into step beside her, the air around them shifting from casual noise to controlled silence. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The cadets' stunned faces were enough. In that moment, everything they thought they knew shattered. She wasn't just a mess hall worker. She wasn't background. She wasn't small. She was Comet Shade. And the base had just been reminded that some call signs never die. The mess hall never recovered from the moment the radio cracked. Even after she left the room with the officers, the air didn't fill with chatter again. The cadets sat at their tables with food cooling on their trays, eyes locked on one another, silent questions hanging between them. Comet Shade? None dared say the name too loudly. It carried weight, as though even whispering it demanded permission. Peters, the cadet who'd noticed her watchfulness before, stared at the folded apron still sitting on the counter. It wasn't just a piece of fabric now. It was a discarded disguise, a symbol of something none of them had seen until it was too late. His chest felt tight. He remembered every laugh, every joke, every careless jab thrown her way. Each one now sounded hollow, like echoes in a room stripped of walls. The minutes dragged. Then an officer entered the hall, stiff-backed, expression unreadable. He glanced across the room at the rows of cadets who scrambled to sit straighter, trays forgotten. His voice carried with the precision of someone delivering orders that mattered. Effective immediately, the mess hall is under restricted access. Cadets are dismissed. Finish your meals elsewhere. Now. No explanation. No details. Just the weight of command. The cadets obeyed without hesitation. They gathered their trays and filed out, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Only Peters lingered, his eyes drifting again to the apron. A kitchen worker nudged him gently. Move along. But Peters knew the truth now. Nothing about her had been ordinary. Across the compound, the operations wing was alive with urgency. Doors hissed open. Boots echoed on polished floors. Screens flickered with maps and coded transmissions. She stepped into the room with the same steady calm she had shown with a ladle in hand. Officers turned, stiffened, then straightened to attention. Some saluted immediately. Others whispered her name under their breath, as though confirming to themselves that she was really there. Comet Shade, one of the colonels said, his tone sharp but laced with relief. "We've been waiting." She gave a short nod. "Brief me." The words were crisp, professional, a far cry from the silence she'd kept in the hall. The air shifted around her instantly. Gone was the apron, the anonymity, the camouflage. Here, she wasn't background. She was center stage. A major leaned over the table, pointing to a flickering satellite feed. "Unusual interference near the border perimeter. We've traced patterns, but they match a signature we've only seen once before, during Operation Nightfall." He glanced up at her, hesitating. "One of yours." The room stilled. Every officer present knew what that meant. Operation Nightfall was legend, spoken of in fragments, most of it classified even from seasoned commanders. And yet here she stood, the one who had lived it. She studied the feed, eyes narrowing. Her fingers tapped once against the table. Old instincts resurfaced like they had never left. "It's not interference," she said quietly. "It's a probe. Testing response times. Mark this location," she pointed sharply, "and double the patrol grid. They're gauging readiness before the real push." The colonel nodded immediately, signaling to the tech team. "Execute." No one questioned her. No one second-guessed her authority. They didn't need to. She had earned it long before these men and women had ever put on their uniforms. Meanwhile, word spread across the base like fire. "Comet Shade" became the only phrase anyone whispered that night. Cadets huddled in dorms, wide-eyed, piecing together rumors. Some swore she had been part of an elite reconnaissance unit. Others insisted she was intelligence, the kind that never shows up on rosters. A few dismissed it all as exaggeration, though even they spoke softer than usual, unwilling to mock too loudly after what they'd seen. Peters listened more than he spoke. He remembered the way her eyes had scanned exits, the way she'd carried herself even in silence. He remembered the sharpness of her movements, the restraint in her posture. He knew then what no rumor could fully capture. The signs had been there all along. They had just been too blind, too arrogant, to notice. One cadet scoffed nervously, trying to laugh it off. "So what? She's a cook who got lucky once." But the words fell flat. No one laughed with him. Instead, silence filled the room, heavier than the air itself. Respect had already shifted, whether they admitted it or not. The following morning, the mess hall doors remained closed. A paper sign was posted outside. Restricted access, staff only. Cadets ate from field rations in the courtyard, their chatter subdued. But before long, the doors creaked open, and there she was. Apron tied once again, gloves in place, ladle ready. The sight made their stomachs twist. No one mocked her now. No one shoved their tray forward carelessly. Each cadet approached with eyes lowered, trays steady, hands trembling slightly. She served them the same as always: ladle, scoop, tray. Calm, measured, silent. But the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of invisibility. It was the silence of command. When Peters reached her, he hesitated. His throat tightened, words caught between shame and respect. "Ma'am," he said softly. She glanced up for just a second, eyes locking with his. Steady, unflinching. She gave the slightest nod, then returned to her work. It was enough. By the end of the day, stories circulated faster than orders. Some claimed she had been decorated by generals, her medals locked away where few could see. Others whispered she had saved entire units in operations no one dared write about. The truth was simple: no one really knew. And maybe they never would. But they all knew one thing: whatever her past held, it wasn't ordinary. That evening, the base commander called an assembly in the central hall. Every cadet, every officer, every staff member was ordered to attend. The room filled with restless bodies and nervous murmurs. At the front, the commander stood flanked by two colonels, a folder in his hands. He cleared his throat, voice sharp as steel. "You all know by now that a call was made yesterday. A name was spoken. Comet Shade." The room hushed instantly. This base has lived under the assumption that our strength is measured by drills, tests, and visible ranks. Yesterday, you were reminded that strength often hides where you least expect it. Some of you mocked. Some of you dismissed. Some of you failed to see what stood in front of you. That ends now. He turned, gesturing toward the side entrance. The doors opened. She stepped in. No apron this time, no disguise. Just a plain uniform, unadorned, yet carried with the weight of something far greater than medals. She walked to the front, her steps steady, her presence undeniable. The commander stepped back, giving her the floor. Silence pressed against the walls. She scanned the room slowly, her eyes meeting cadet after cadet. Some flinched. Some held her gaze, though their throats tightened. When she spoke, her voice was low but clear. I didn't stay silent to be mysterious. I stayed silent because missions like mine don't belong in stories. They belong in memory, carried quietly, without demand for recognition. I wasn't behind that counter to remind anyone who I was. I was there because even the smallest post deserves to be guarded well. Respect isn't about the job you're given. It's about how you hold it. Her words sank deep, heavier than any lecture they had ever heard. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Then she added, "You think leadership is shouting orders. You think respect is earned through medals. But leadership is patience. Respect is restraint. You mocked what you didn't understand. And when the call came, you realized what you missed. Don't make that mistake again." She stepped back, her eyes never leaving theirs, then gave a single nod to the commander. That was all. The commander returned to the podium. His tone was final, unyielding. Her record will not be disclosed here. What you need to know is this. She has served in ways most of you cannot imagine. You owe her respect, not because of who she was, but because of how she carried it without ever demanding it. Let that lesson shape you. The assembly ended in silence. No applause, no cheers, only the heavy realization of what they had witnessed. Weeks passed. The jokes never returned. Cadets straightened when they saw her, some even saluting quietly. She never demanded it, never acknowledged it, but their gestures carried weight nonetheless. Peters, in particular, watched her with new eyes. He studied the way she walked the hall before opening, the way her eyes swept the exits, the way she carried herself even when no one seemed to notice. And he understood, finally, that leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears an apron. Late one evening, he found himself assigned to clean up duty in the mess. She was there, stacking trays with the same quiet efficiency. He hesitated, then spoke. "I was wrong about you." She didn't look up. "You weren't wrong. You just didn't see." Her words cut deeper than any reprimand. He swallowed hard. "I see now." For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. "Good. Then maybe you'll see others before it's too late." Her call sign was never spoken again in public. The radio remained silent, but the name lingered on the base in whispers, not as a mystery anymore, but as a lesson. Comet Shade wasn't just a soldier. She was a reminder that dignity doesn't need a uniform, that respect isn't about visibility, that the ones you overlook often carry the stories that shape everything. And in the mess hall, trays still clattered, steam still rose, cadets still filed in and out. But the silence around her had changed forever. Because once you know who someone really is, you can never look at them the same way again.